I'm Deborah, 29, a financial analyst who's been living with my parents to save for my dream home. We've always been close, sharing dinners and weekend movies together. That all changed when my cousin Jake lost his job. My parents, with their unwavering family-first mentality, didn't hesitate to offer him a place to stay. When I voiced my concerns, they simply said, "You'll just have to make sacrifices for family. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Hit subscribe and like if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family pressure." Now let me tell you what happened next. Working as a financial analyst at Morrison & Bailey in Chicago wasn't just a job for me. It was my pathway to independence. 3 years ago, when apartment prices skyrocketed in the city, my parents Martha and Richard suggested I move back home temporarily to save money. "Stay as long as you need to save for your home," they promised, seeming genuinely happy to have me back. Our arrangement was straightforward. I converted our basement into a comfortable living space with a private bathroom. It wasn't fancy, but I added touches that made it mine: a plush area rug, framed travel photos, and a small desk where I could work remotely when needed. The space gave me privacy while still being part of the family home. Financially, I contributed significantly. I paid 60% of all household expenses, including the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and home repairs. My parents were retired: Martha from 30 years of teaching elementary school, and Richard from the Postal Service. Their pension covered their personal expenses, but having my additional income made their retirement much more comfortable. I was always careful to be a respectful housemate. I cleaned up after myself, did more than my share of household chores, and maintained reasonable quiet hours. We established boundaries early on. I had my space, they had theirs, and we shared the common areas. For the most part, it worked well. My parents had always been generous people, sometimes to a fault. Growing up, I watched them lend money to relatives that was never repaid, babysit cousins for weeks without compensation, and drive hours to help with family emergencies. They were raised with the belief that family always comes first, no questions asked. Over Sunday dinners, I'd often hear stories about various relatives and their problems. My mother would sigh and say, "Your Uncle Pete is struggling again," or "Your cousin Tina needs help with her kids." They would look at me expectantly, as if gauging my reaction to these family obligations. "Remember, Deborah," my father would say while passing the mashed potatoes, "in this world, all we really have is family." I'd nod politely while thinking about my friends whose families respected boundaries and didn't constantly demand sacrifices. But I loved my parents and appreciated the arrangement we had, so I kept these thoughts to myself. The warning signs began subtly. My mother started making more frequent comments about family needing to stick together during hard times. My father would read news stories about housing costs and homelessness, then remark how fortunate we were to have each other to rely on. One evening, I came home to find them whispering in the kitchen, abruptly stopping when I walked in. My mother busied herself with dinner preparations, while my father asked about my day with unusual enthusiasm. Looking back, I should have recognized these signals. They were preparing me for what was coming, softening the ground before dropping their bombshell. That night, I sat on the couch, scrolling through home listings on my tablet, calculating how much longer I'd need to save for a decent down payment. I had no idea that my carefully constructed living arrangement and savings plan were about to be completely upended by a family obligation I never agreed to. It was a Thursday evening when my parents called for a family meeting. This phrase always made my stomach clench. In our household, it typically preceded unwelcome news delivered with the expectation of unquestioning acceptance. "Deborah, honey," my mother began, nervously smoothing her cardigan, "we need to talk about your cousin Jake." Jake was my father's sister's son, technically my first cousin, though we'd never been close. At family gatherings, he'd usually be in a corner complaining about his boss, or bragging about some get-rich-quick scheme. At 32, 3 years older than me, Jake had cycled through at least 6 different sales jobs that I knew of. He lost his position at the electronics store. My father continued, his voice carrying that forced optimism I recognized from childhood when he'd try to put a positive spin on disappointing news. Apparently, there was some misunderstanding about commission structures. From what I gathered through family gossip, Jake had been caught trying to manipulate sales records to increase his commission. This wasn't his first job loss for questionable reasons. My mother jumped in. He's been staying with Aunt Patty, but you know how small her apartment is, and with her arthritis getting worse, having someone else there is just too much. I nodded slowly, already sensing where this conversation was heading. Jake had a pattern of cycling through relatives' homes when things got tough, leaving when he'd worn out his welcome, or when expectations of contribution arose. The thing is, my father cleared his throat. Jake called us yesterday. He's really in a tough spot. He has nowhere else to go, my mother added, her eyes pleading. Everyone else has already taken turns helping him. The realization hit me. You want him to stay here? They exchanged that look parents give each other when they've already made a decision but are pretending to consider your input. Just until he finds a job, my father assured me. Maybe a month or two at most. He's family, my mother said, invoking the ultimate trump card in our household. I took a deep breath. Where exactly would he stay? Our house wasn't particularly large, a 3-bedroom ranch with my parents in the master bedroom, me in the basement, and a small spare room that served as my mother's sewing area and occasional guest room. Another exchanged glance between them. Well, the spare room next to your bedroom would be perfect for him, my mother said. My heart sank. The spare room shared a wall with my space. The wall was thin enough that I could often hear my mother's sewing machine whirring. But that's right next to my area, I protested. I'll have no privacy. Honey, my mother reached for my hand. Family takes care of family. We can't turn him away when he has nowhere to go. What about his contributions to the household? I asked, trying to approach this practically. Will he be paying rent, helping with groceries or utilities? My father shifted uncomfortably. Well, he's between jobs right now, so he can't contribute financially just yet, but I'm sure he'll help around the house until he gets back on his feet. Based on everything I knew about Jake, this seemed highly unlikely, but my parents were looking at me with such expectation, as if my agreement was a test of my character and family loyalty. I don't think this is a good idea, I said carefully. Jake has a history of what? My father interrupted, his voice taking on an edge. Of needing help, don't we all sometimes? My mother squeezed my hand. Deborah, you'll just have to make sacrifices for family. That's what we do. There it was, the family mantra, the conversation stopper, the guilt inducer. I felt cornered. How long exactly do you expect him to stay? Like we said, just until he finds work, my mother repeated. He's really motivated this time. Against my better judgment, I reluctantly agreed, but tried to establish some boundaries. I'll need him to respect my space, and while I understand he can't contribute financially right away, I'm not increasing my contribution to cover his expenses. They agreed so readily that I should have been suspicious. Looking back, I realized they would have agreed to anything to get my compliance in that moment. 3 days later, Jake arrived with 3 large suitcases and 4 boxes for his temporary stay. As I helped carry his belongings up to the spare room, I noticed designer clothes, a high-end gaming system, and the latest smartphone model, things that suggested his financial priorities might be part of his problem. Thanks for letting me crash here, cuz, he said with a casual slap on my shoulder. It'll be just like having the sibling neither of us had. I forced a smile while thinking this was exactly why I was grateful to be an only child. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of Jake unpacking and rearranging furniture in the room next door, I had no idea how quickly and dramatically my living situation was about to deteriorate. The first week with Jake in the house was awkwardly civil. He kept mostly to his room during the day, emerging for meals that my mother eagerly prepared for him. "Poor thing needs to get his strength back," she'd say, as if unemployment were a physical illness requiring nutritional therapy. At dinner, Jake would share elaborate stories about potential job prospects and business connections that sounded impressive to my parents but rang hollow to me. He'd talk about interviews that were practically in the bag and former colleagues who were definitely going to hook him up. My parents ate it up, nodding encouragingly and offering platitudes like, "It's just a matter of time," and "the right opportunity is just around the corner." By the second week, the real Jake began to emerge. The first sign was the noise. Jake was a night owl who apparently believed headphones were optional. From video games with vivid sound effects to late-night phone conversations where he'd laugh loudly at 2 in the morning, my sleep began to suffer. When I knocked on his door to ask him to keep it down, he'd apologize insincerely and lower the volume for about 15 minutes before gradually turning it back up. Then there were the messes. Dishes left in the sink, wet towels on the bathroom floor, muddy shoes tracked through the hallway. My mother, who had always been particular about household cleanliness, suddenly developed selective blindness. "He's adjusting," she'd say, as she quietly cleaned up after him. Food began disappearing at an alarming rate, particularly the special items I purchased for myself. My protein shakes for busy mornings, the dark chocolate I saved for weekend treats, even leftovers I'd specifically labeled with my name would vanish without acknowledgement. One evening, I returned home to find Jake using my personal laptop that I'd accidentally left on the kitchen table. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He barely looked up. "Just checking some job listings. My phone was dead." "That's my work computer. It has sensitive client information on it." He shrugged, continuing to type. "We're family. It's not like I'm some stranger who's going to steal your stuff." I firmly closed the laptop and took it back. "Family or not, you need to ask before using my things." Later, I overheard him complaining to my mother. "Deborah's so uptight about her stuff. You'd think she'd want to help me find a job." To my dismay, instead of supporting my boundary, my mother gently suggested that I might be a little more generous with my cousin during his difficult time. The household expenses began to rise noticeably. The water bill increased by 40% thanks to Jake's marathon showers. The electric bill surged from his constant use of electronics. Groceries that usually lasted a week now disappeared in 3 days. When I brought this up during a family dinner, suggesting that perhaps Jake could contribute even a small amount toward these increased costs, my parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "He's going through a tough time," my father said firmly. "But so are we," I countered. "I'm happy to continue paying my share, but covering Jake's extensive use of resources wasn't part of our agreement." Jake looked wounded. "I didn't realize I was such a burden. Maybe I should just live in my car." My mother immediately jumped to console him. "Don't be ridiculous. You're not a burden at all." No one seemed concerned about the burden on me or my finances. After 3 weeks, I attempted to have a reasonable conversation with Jake directly. I caught him in the kitchen one afternoon as he was making yet another elaborate sandwich with expensive deli meats I had bought. "Jake, can we talk about some household expectations?" I began carefully. He took a massive bite of his sandwich. "Sure, what's up?" "I think we need some clear boundaries. If you could keep the noise down after 11, clean up after yourself, and ask before using my things or food I've purchased specifically for myself, I think we'd all get along better." He chewed slowly, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. After swallowing, he said, "Look, Deborah, I appreciate your concern, but your parents said I could stay here. Not you. They don't seem to have a problem with how I'm living." "But I do," I said, trying to stay calm. "We're all sharing this space." "Exactly. Sharing. Isn't that what family does?" He took another bite and walked away, effectively ending the conversation. The situation deteriorated further when Jake began inviting friends over without warning. I'd come home from work to find strangers in the living room playing video games and leaving beer cans scattered around. My parents, who normally would never tolerate such behavior, made excuses. "It's good for Jake to maintain his social connections," my mother explained. "His friends might know about job openings." From what I observed, these friends weren't exactly wellsprings of career opportunities. Most seemed to be in situations similar to Jake's, drifting between jobs or living off relatives' goodwill. Whenever conflicts arose, a clear pattern emerged. Jake would do something inconsiderate, I would object, and my parents would side with him. The dynamic was as consistent as it was infuriating. My sanctuary was being invaded, my boundaries trampled, and my concerns dismissed. As the weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks with no sign of Jake making any genuine effort to find employment or change his behavior, a slow realization began to dawn on me. This arrangement wasn't temporary. My parents had no real timeline for Jake's stay, no concrete expectations for his behavior, and no willingness to hold him accountable. The cousin who was supposed to stay just until he finds a job was settling in for what looked like permanent residency, and I was expected to simply accept it. Each night, as I tried to sleep through the noise coming from Jake's room, a resentment began building inside me. A resentment not just toward Jake, but increasingly toward my parents as well. The situation had been deteriorating for 2 months. Jake remained jobless, though his stories about potential opportunities grew increasingly elaborate. "I'm in final discussions for a regional sales director position," he'd announce at dinner, while earlier I had overheard him decline an interview for a basic retail position because the hours weren't ideal. My parents continued to make excuses for him. "The job market is so competitive these days," my mother would say, serving Jake a second helping of dinner while he scrolled through social media, ignoring job listing notifications on his phone. I had started spending more time at the office and visiting friends on weekends, anything to avoid the tension at home. The financial strain was also mounting. I was still covering 60% of household expenses, but now those expenses had increased significantly with Jake's presence. Then came the weekend that shattered whatever tolerance I had left. My parents had left for a 3-day trip to visit my aunt in Milwaukee. Before leaving, my mother had pulled me aside. "Keep an eye on Jake, will you? Maybe you two can bond while we're gone." I had nodded politely, though the prospect of bonding with Jake ranked somewhere below dental surgery on my list of desired experiences. That Friday, I worked late trying to finish a complex financial analysis for a client. Around 9 in the evening, I packed up my laptop and headed home, looking forward to a quiet night alone, as Jake had mentioned, having plans with friends. As I turned onto our street, my stomach dropped. Every light in the house was blazing cars, lined the curb, and the bass from loud music vibrated through the night air. Jake was having a party, a big one. I parked 2 blocks away because there was no space closer and walked toward the house in a daze of disbelief. Inside was chaos. At least 20 strangers filled our living room and kitchen. The furniture had been rearranged, drinks spilled on the carpet, and someone was using my mother's prized serving dishes for ashtrays. I pushed through the crowd searching for Jake. When I finally found him in the backyard, he was slouched in a lawn chair, clearly intoxicated, surrounded by equally inebriated friends. "Jake! What is this?" I shouted over the music. He looked up, his eyes unfocused. "Deborah, my favorite cousin, come join the fun." "This is not okay," I said firmly. "These people need to leave. Now." Jake frowned, then laughed. "Don't be such a buzzkill. Your parents are cool with me having friends over." "A few friends, maybe. Not turning the house into a nightclub. Mom and Dad trusted you." One of Jake's friends snickered. "Ooh, someone's in trouble with Mommy and Daddy." Jake grinned, emboldened by his audience. Listen, Deborah, why don't you lighten up? Or better yet, why don't you go to a hotel for the night? If you're going to be like this, I'll Venmo you the money. He made a grand gesture of reaching for his phone, though we both knew his account was likely empty. This is my house, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Actually, Jake leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. It's your parents' house. You just pay rent. Like me. He winked, knowing full well he contributed nothing. I turned and walked away, not trusting myself to respond. Back inside, I was horrified to discover someone had entered my basement space. My belongings had been rifled through makeup scattered across the floor, and my jewelry box upturned. A pair of expensive earrings my parents had given me for my 25th birthday were missing. Something snapped inside me. I marched upstairs, found the circuit breaker, and cut power to the entire house. As darkness fell and the music died, confused voices filled the air. "Party's over!" I shouted into the darkness. "Everyone who doesn't live here needs to leave right now, or I'm calling the police." There were groans and complaints, but the threat of police involvement motivated a surprisingly swift exodus. Within 20 minutes, only Jake and I remained. I restored power to find him glaring at me in the living room. "What the hell, Deborah?" he spat. "You completely humiliated me in front of my friends." I looked around at the disaster that was our home. Stains on the carpet, a broken picture frame, the lingering smell of marijuana, and upstairs, my violated personal space. "Someone went through my things," I said coldly. "My birthday earrings are missing." Jake rolled his eyes. "Don't look at me. I didn't touch your stuff. Maybe you misplaced them." "I'm calling Mom and Dad." "Go ahead," he said with surprising confidence. "They'll understand I needed to blow off some steam. Job hunting is stressful, you know." I called my parents, hands still shaking with rage. When they answered, I described the scene in detail, the house, the number of strangers, my missing jewelry. Their response left me speechless. "Well, everyone makes mistakes," my mother said after a pause. "I'm sure Jake didn't mean for things to get out of hand." "The house is trashed," I emphasized. "My things were stolen." My father chimed in. "Now, Deborah, let's not jump to conclusions. Are you sure you didn't misplace the earrings? And as for the house, I'm sure between you and Jake you can get it cleaned up before we get back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're not upset with him?" "Of course we're disappointed," my mother said. "But getting angry won't solve anything. Jake is going through a difficult time. He made a mistake." "A mistake?" "He deliberately threw a huge party while you were gone, let strangers into my private space, and now my belongings are missing. And you're making excuses for him." "We're not making excuses," my father said, his voice taking on that stern tone that had intimidated me as a child, but now just fueled my anger. "But family forgives, Deborah. You've always had a hard time with that concept." After hanging up, I turned to find Jake smirking at me. "Told you they'd understand," he said, heading toward the kitchen for another beer, stepping over debris without any indication he intended to clean it. It was at that moment I realized a painful truth in my parents' eyes. Jake's needs and comfort would always take precedence over mine, regardless of how unreasonable his behavior or how legitimate my complaints. The cousin who contributed nothing was more valuable than the daughter who had been supporting them financially for years. "They're extending your stay indefinitely, aren't they?" I asked, the pieces finally fitting together. Jake shrugged. "They said I could stay as long as I need to. They understand that finding the right opportunity takes time." He eyed me challengingly. "They mentioned you might need to increase your contributions since expenses have gone up. We're family after all. We make sacrifices for each other." He emphasized the word sacrifices, mockingly throwing my parents' favorite phrase back at me. I said nothing more. As I went downstairs to assess the damage to my space, taking photos of everything, a plan began forming in my mind. If my parents had made their choice, then perhaps it was time for me to make mine. The morning after Jake's disastrous party, I sat in a coffee shop several blocks from home, my laptop open but untouched, a cold latte beside me. For 3 hours, I'd been staring at rental listings, calculating budgets, and contemplating a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. A moment of clarity had struck me as I'd cleaned the last of the party debris alone, Jake having mysteriously disappeared for the day. I deserved better treatment. I deserved respect. And if my family wouldn't provide it, I needed to create a situation where I could find it for myself. The apartment listings showed that moving out would be financially challenging. Even a modest one-bedroom would cost more than my contribution at home. But as I created a detailed spreadsheet of expenses, I realized something I'd overlooked: the true cost of my current living situation wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was my peace of mind. It was my self-respect. What exactly am I saving for? I whispered to myself. A future home while sacrificing my present happiness. By midday, I had narrowed my search to 5 potential apartments, all within a reasonable commute to my office. One in particular caught my attention, a small but charming one-bedroom in a converted brownstone with hardwood floors and large windows. It was about 15 minutes closer to work than my parents' house in a neighborhood with shops and cafes within walking distance. The rental application process moved with surprising speed. My excellent credit score and steady employment history worked in my favor. By the end of the day, I received a call from the property manager. Ms. Harlow, I'm pleased to inform you that your application for the Parkview Avenue apartment has been approved. When would you like to schedule the lease signing? A weight lifted from my chest. Is tomorrow possible? The next day, I signed a 1-year lease, putting down the security deposit and first month's rent from my savings. It was a significant financial hit, but as I signed my name, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. I didn't tell my parents, not yet. Their disappointment in me after siding with Jake had created an emotional distance that made secretive planning easier. They assumed my quietness was sulking. They didn't realize it was strategy. Over the next 2 weeks, I began a careful process of sorting and packing my belongings when no one was home. Essential documents, irreplaceable mementos, and valuable items went first, transported to the new apartment in discreet trips. Clothing followed a little at a time until my closet held just enough to avoid suspicion. My friend Marissa was the only person who knew what I was planning. She helped transport larger items and offered emotional support when doubts crept in. Am I being selfish? I asked her one evening as we assembled my new bed frame. Maybe I should have tried harder to make it work. Marissa paused, Allen wrench in hand. Deborah, would you tell a friend to stay in a situation where her boundaries are constantly violated, her concerns dismissed, and her generosity taken advantage of, just because it's family doing the taking advantage? Put that way, the answer was obvious. No, of course not. Then why are you holding yourself to a different standard? Love doesn't mean being a doormat. Her words resonated deeply. For years, I'd accepted my parents' definition of family obligation, without questioning whether it was healthy or balanced. I'd allowed guilt to override my instincts about fairness and mutual respect. As my new apartment slowly transformed into a home, I wrestled with how to tell my parents. A face-to-face conversation seemed likely to devolve into emotional manipulation and guilt trips. A phone call felt too impersonal for news this significant. Finally, I decided on a letter, a detailed, honest, but kind explanation of my decision. I spent an entire evening writing it, balancing honesty with compassion. Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will have moved into my own apartment. This decision wasn't made lightly or in anger. but after careful consideration of what's best for all of us. For 3 years, I've contributed significantly to our household, both financially and otherwise. I've been grateful for the opportunity to live with you while saving, but recent changes have made it clear that our arrangement is no longer working. Jake's presence has fundamentally altered our household dynamic. My concerns have been repeatedly dismissed, my boundaries disrespected, and my financial contributions taken for granted. The incident during your weekend away was not simply about a party, but about the larger pattern of Jake's behavior being excused while my legitimate grievances are minimized. I want to be clear, I'm not asking you to choose between Jake and me. You've already made that choice, and while it hurts, I respect your right to make it. Jake is family, and he does need support. But so do I, and I've realized I need to prioritize my own well-being, since no one else in our home currently is. I've signed a lease and established my new household. I will no longer be contributing to expenses at your house, as that responsibility should now fall to those living there. I've left a check covering my portion through the end of this month to allow you time to adjust your budget. I love you both deeply. This move isn't about rejecting our family, but about establishing healthy boundaries. I hope that with some distance, we can rebuild our relationship on more balanced terms. I'll call you in a few days when emotions have had time to settle. With love, Deborah. I sealed the letter in an envelope, along with a detailed accounting of my financial contributions over the past 3 years and the check for my final month's expenses. The day of my final move arrived. I'd chosen a Thursday when both my parents would be at their respective volunteer activities and Jake was usually out with friends. Marissa and 2 other friends arrived with a small moving truck for my remaining furniture, a bookshelf desk, and a comfortable reading chair I'd purchased myself. As we loaded the last items, I took a final walk through my basement space. Empty now, it looked smaller somehow, the indentations in the carpet, the only evidence of the life I'd built there. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, where it would be immediately visible when my parents returned. That evening, in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes and the slight chaos of a fresh move, I experienced a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for the family relationship that had deteriorated. Guilt that still whispered I should have tried harder. But predominantly, a profound sense of peace. For the first time in months, I could play music without worrying about bothering anyone. I could leave my belongings out without fear of them being used or taken. I could simply exist in my space on my terms. I ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and toasted to my new beginning. Around 9 o'clock, my phone began ringing. My parents had found the letter. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. The messages began rolling in. Deborah, call us immediately. We need to discuss this ridiculous decision. How could you just leave like this after everything we've done for you? This is so irresponsible. What about your commitment to this household? The final voicemail, left close to midnight, revealed what was perhaps their true concern. Who's going to pay the bills? Now, do you have any idea what this will do to our finances? Call us back, right now. I turned off my phone, crawled into my new bed, and slept more soundly than I had in months. Who's going to pay the bills? This question echoed in my mind as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation with my parents. The day after moving into my apartment, I turned my phone back on to find 17 missed calls and numerous text messages ranging from guilt-inducing to openly hostile. I took a deep breath and called them back, steeling myself for what was to come. My mother answered on the first ring. Deborah, what do you think you're doing? How could you just leave like this? Mom, I explained everything in my letter. I needed to make a change that was healthy for me. Healthy abandoning your family is healthy. We've given you a home for years. A home I've paid the majority of expenses for, I reminded her gently, and one where my concerns and boundaries weren't being respected. My father's voice cut in. They'd put me on speakerphone. This is about Jake, isn't it? You've always been jealous of the attention we give others. The accusation stung, but I remained calm. This isn't about jealousy. It's about basic respect and fairness. Jake moved in, contributes nothing, disrespects my space and belongings, and when I raise concerns, I'm told to make sacrifices for family. Because that's what family does, my mother exclaimed. No, I said firmly. Family supports each other mutually. Family respects boundaries. Family doesn't take one member for granted while coddling another. Well, now we're in a terrible position financially, my father said. The mortgage, the utilities, we can't afford all that without your contribution. There it was. The real issue wasn't my absence, it was my wallet's absence. I took a steadying breath. I understand this creates a financial challenge, but I've been paying far more than my fair share for years. Perhaps this is an opportunity for Jake to step up and contribute. He can't, my mother protested. He doesn't have a job. He's had 2 months to find one, I pointed out. There are plenty of positions available that might not be his dream job, but would allow him to contribute. Or perhaps it's time to establish a deadline for his stay. There was a telling silence. Then my father spoke, his voice unnaturally calm. He told us you've been hostile toward him, making him feel unwelcome. Is that how we raised you to treat family in need? I recognized the tactic divert blame, make me the villain, but I was beyond being manipulated. Jake had a party with over 20 strangers in your house while you were away, I reminded them. My personal space was invaded. Items were stolen. And your response was to tell me to help clean up and not jump to conclusions. Was that how you raised me to expect to be treated by family? More silence. Then my mother voice quavering. Can't you just come home and we'll work this out? I am home, I said gently. My home, where I'm respected and valued. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes. They cycled through guilt, anger, financial concerns, and attempts at emotional manipulation. I remained firm but kind, repeating my boundaries without engaging in their escalating emotions. Finally, my father asked directly, So you're really not coming back? No, Dad. I've signed a year lease. This is my home now. And you're really not going to keep helping with our expenses? The money I provided was for my living there. I'm not living there anymore. After we hung up, I felt emotionally drained, but oddly empowered. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had established a boundary with my parents and held it despite immense pressure. Over the next week, news of my move spread through the extended family. The reactions were divided. Some relatives, older ones, mainly sided with my parents, calling me selfish and ungrateful. Others, particularly cousins my age, privately messaged their support. About time someone stood up to Uncle Richard and Aunt Martha's guilt trips, my cousin Sarah wrote. They've been using that family obligation line to manipulate everyone for years. More surprising was a message from my Aunt Patty, Jake's previous host. I should have warned you about Jake, she wrote. He pulled the same routine with me, showed up temporarily. Contributed nothing, treated my home like a hotel, and made me feel guilty for having concerns. Good for you for drawing a line. Meanwhile, Jake had apparently been shocked to learn how much I'd been contributing financially. According to another cousin who still spoke with my parents, Jake had assumed I was paying a nominal amount for my basement space, not carrying the bulk of household expenses. Your parents are freaking out, my cousin told me. They didn't realize how dependent they'd become on your money. They've actually asked Jake to start looking for work more seriously. This news brought me no pleasure. I hadn't wanted to create hardship for my parents. I'd simply needed to remove myself from an unhealthy situation. Still, perhaps this financial reality check would prompt some necessary changes in their enabling behavior. A month into my new living arrangement, I was thriving despite the tighter budget. My apartment, though small, felt like a sanctuary. I decorated it simply but warmly with plants in the windows and photographs on the walls. The morning walk to the train station took me past a bakery, where I'd become a regular, the owner now greeting me by name. At work, colleagues commented on my improved mood and energy. "You seem lighter somehow," my manager observed during our weekly check-in. "Whatever changes you've made in your personal life, they're working for you." My relationship with my parents remained strained. We spoke briefly every week or so, our conversations polite but superficial. They had stopped asking me to move back, but occasionally dropped hints about financial struggles, which I acknowledged sympathetically without offering solutions. Through family grapevine, I learned that Jake had finally secured a part-time job at a local hardware store. Not the prestigious sales position he'd claimed to be pursuing, but employment nonetheless. He was apparently contributing minimally to household expenses, though far less than what I had provided. 6 weeks after my departure, my mother called with a different tone in her voice. "Would you have coffee with us this weekend just to talk? Neutral territory." We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. My parents looked tired, older somehow. My father's usual confident posture was diminished. My mother's typically perfect hair showing more gray than I remembered. "You look well," my mother said after an awkward greeting. "The new place must be agreeing with you." "It is," I confirmed. "It's been good for me." My father cleared his throat. "Deborah, we've been doing some thinking and some talking with a counselor at church." This surprised me. My father had always dismissed therapy or counseling as unnecessary for people who just need to buckle down and handle their problems. "We may have been—" He seemed to struggle with the words "unfair" in our expectations of you. My mother reached across the table for my hand. "We took advantage of your generosity. We didn't respect your concerns about Jake, and when you tried to establish reasonable boundaries, we made you feel guilty instead of listening." I hadn't expected this level of self-awareness or acknowledgement. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear you recognize those things." "Jake is still with us," my father added. "But things have changed. He's working now." "Not much, but it's something. And we've given him a timeline 3 more months to find a full-time position and his own place." "He was quite shocked when he realized how much you'd been contributing," my mother said with a small smile. "I think he assumed we were financially carrying you, not the other way around." We talked for nearly 2 hours, moving beyond apologies into more honest communication than we'd had in years. They shared their fears about retirement finances that I'd been helping alleviate. I explained how the constant dismissal of my concerns had made me feel unvalued as a family member. "We'd like to rebuild our relationship," my father said as we prepared to leave. "On healthier terms, no guilt trips, no financial expectations, just family who respect each other." "I'd like that too," I said, meaning it. In the months that followed, we established a new normal. I visited for dinner once a week. We celebrated holidays together. Slowly, the tension eased, replaced by a more mature, equal relationship. True to their word, my parents held Jake to his timeline. When the 3 months elapsed, he tried to negotiate an extension, but my father surprisingly held firm. Jake eventually found a small apartment with a roommate and a decent full-time job. Our relationship remained distant but cordial when we encountered each other at family gatherings. A year after moving out, as my lease renewal approached, I faced a decision: renew or look for something larger. My savings had recovered somewhat, though not to the level they might have been had I stayed with my parents. Ultimately, I chose to renew. My apartment, modest as it was, represented something precious: independence, self-respect, and the courage to establish boundaries even with those we love most. On the anniversary of my move, I hosted a small dinner party. My parents attended along with Marissa, and a few close friends. As we raised glasses in a toast, my father surprised me by saying, "To Deborah, who taught us that true family support means respecting each other's boundaries and needs. We're proud of you, honey." Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood on my small balcony looking at the city lights. The path to this moment hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had required difficult choices and uncomfortable confrontations. But standing in my own space on my own terms, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decision. Sometimes, the most important sacrifices we make for family aren't the ones that diminish us, but the ones that help everyone grow into better, more respectful versions of themselves. Looking back on everything that happened with my parents and Jake, I realize now that healing isn't a straight line. It's a winding path with steps forward and occasional slides back into old patterns. The first few months after moving out were the hardest. Despite our emotional coffee shop reconciliation, there were still difficult moments. Holiday gatherings brought tension. My mother occasionally slipped into guilt-inducing comments, though she'd usually catch herself midway. "It would be nice if you could help with—" never mind, that's not fair to ask. My father struggled with the financial adjustments. I once overheard him telling a family friend, "We're downsizing some expenses since Deborah moved to her own place." The slip revealed healing takes time, especially when relationships have fallen into unhealthy patterns for years. For my part, I had to work through lingering resentment. When my mother would call with innocent updates about family news, I'd sometimes find myself tensing, waiting for the manipulation that no longer came. Trust rebuilds slowly, one interaction at a time. The journey of emotional recovery wasn't something I navigated alone. Marissa continued to be my sounding board, offering perspective when family dynamics clouded my judgment. I also joined a support group for adult children, establishing boundaries with parents, an eye-opening experience that helped me see how common these struggles are. Family systems resist change, the group facilitator often reminded us. When you change your role in the family, everyone else has to adjust, and that creates resistance. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. This framing helped me understand my parents' initial anger, not as rejection of me personally, but as resistance to a change that forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their financial situation and their enabling of Jake. Work became a healing space as well. I threw myself into new projects, earning a promotion 6 months after moving out. The salary increase helped ease the financial pressure of living alone, allowing me to start rebuilding my savings while also enjoying small luxuries like occasional dinners out or concert tickets, things I'd denied myself during the tight budget of those first months. As for Jake, our paths crossed at family gatherings where we maintained polite but distant interactions. I heard through family channels that his job at the hardware store had evolved into a more significant role when he showed unexpected talent for inventory management. He was dating someone steadily, and there were rumors of them looking for an apartment together. "He's actually grown up a lot," my mother told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "I think having firm boundaries set by your father was good for him." I smiled at the irony she could see how boundaries helped Jake, but had needed a major disruption to recognize how the lack of boundaries had hurt our relationship. The most significant healing came 9 months after my move, when my parents decided to downsize to a smaller home that better suited their retirement needs and budget. "We've been thinking about this for years," my father explained, "but we kept putting it off because we didn't want to uproot you." "Or maybe," my mother added with newfound self-awareness, "we were using that as an excuse because we'd grown dependent on your financial contribution." They asked for my help with the moving process, not financial assistance, but my organizational skills and emotional support. Working together to sort through decades of accumulated possessions became an unexpected bonding experience. Stories emerged with each item we packed or discarded, creating bridges between my childhood memories and my adult understanding of my parents as complex people with their own struggles and insecurities. In their new, more manageable home, my parents seemed lighter unburdened, not just from excess possessions, but from unsustainable financial pressures. Our relationship continued to evolve, finding a healthier balance between independence and connection. 1 year after moving out, I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Proud of you every day. You taught us all what healthy love really means." The message brought tears to my eyes. In standing up for myself, I hadn't lost my family as I'd feared. Instead, I'd created the opportunity for a more authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. This experience taught me profound lessons I carry forward. That true love supports growth, not dependence. That healthy boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for genuine relationships. That sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish anyone involved. And perhaps most importantly, that we teach others how to treat us through what we're willing to accept. I still haven't found that dream home I was originally saving for. My financial journey took a different path than I'd planned. But I've found something more valuable, the confidence to create a life that honors my own needs while still maintaining meaningful family connections on healthier terms. If you're facing similar challenges with family expectations and boundaries, remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing others away. It's about creating the conditions where real love can flourish. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say to unhealthy family dynamics is simply, "No, this doesn't work for me anymore." Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle the guilt or pressure to conform to unreasonable expectations? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's support each other in building healthier family dynamics. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't measured by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how authentically you show up for yourself and those you love.